Fantasy Football Nation, Week 8 is already here, so it is time to get into another edition of Waiver Wire Ads. I'm going to give you 10 players that I think could be great additions to your team these next couple weeks. But first, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. We will begin today with the quarterbacks. I'm going to give you 3 quarterbacks that you should consider adding. The first one is if you can afford to take a risk, and that would be Tua Tagovailoa. I would not consider starting him anywhere near this point, especially this week going against Aaron Donald. But the offensive line is improving. Devontae Parker, Mike Gesicki, and Preston Williams have turned out to be decent enough. So he has a decent supporting cast, and we know Tua, when he's at his best, the sky is the limit. So he is a guy that if you can afford to take a risk, a guy you may want to consider adding and saving for later in the year. But if you need one this week, go with either Jimmy Garoppolo or Teddy Bridgewater. Garoppolo has had 2 good games in a row. Last week, coming off a great game against New England. This week has an easier defense against Seattle. However, he is down a few weapons. They lose Jeff Wilson, so they're really down to Jerick McKinnon, and that is it in the backfield. Plus, he is going to more than likely be without Deebo Samuel. So he loses his number 1 receiver, and he was already down to his 3rd string running back, and the 4th string running back is out. So he has 1 running back. Of course, he has a good tight end, and Brandon Ayuk, and that is about it. But the number 1 ad I would say at the quarterback position this week is Teddy Bridgewater in the Thursday night tilt against Atlanta. He's about 38% owned across leagues across the board. A guy that should have a great game this week. Pretty much everyone does against Atlanta. Arguably the worst defense in the league. I would probably say Cowboys are worse, but nonetheless, Bridgewater has a great matchup this week. Plus, he is getting DJ Moore involved into the offense. Curtis Samuel is getting involved. Christian McCaffrey will be coming back soon, and he just seems to be getting acclimated and becoming comfortable in this offense. A guy that you should consider picking up this week. If you need a starter, I would say Teddy Bridgewater is a guy you should consider picking up. Let's move to the running back position. La'Mical Perine. I'm not a huge fan of Perine, but if you are in desperation mode at running back like many fantasy owners are, you may want to consider picking him up. He's going to be getting the receiving work out of the backfield now that there is no Le'Veon Bell, and he is getting more of the carries. He's kind of sharing with Frank Gore. This week against Kansas City, they'll be throwing the ball a lot, so if you needed a jet running back, you would want Perine over Gore. He's only about 1% owned in fantasy leagues across the board, so Perine is a guy that I would say I would hold off on unless you are in desperation mode, but he is a name you may want to consider, especially if he has another good game this week. But the 2 that I would want to consider more would be Chase Edmonds, who is on bye this week, but with Kenyon Drake's injury, we don't know what the extent of it really is yet, but if he happens to miss time, Chase Edmonds is the starter. He's been super efficient in the carries that he has gotten. I expect his workload to increase whether Drake comes back or not. And then Carlos Hyde. We saw Chris Carson get injured in the Sunday night game. We'll see how long he's going to be out. San Francisco isn't the best of matchups, but if you need a flex starter this week, he could probably act as a flex starter. And in future weeks, you may want to consider him if Carson is out for more than 1 week. He's probably the number 1 running back ad this week. Let's move to the wide receiver position. There are a few interesting names this week. First one is Corey Davis. He, with all of the COVID, when he tested positive, was on the COVID list. He was dropped in a lot of leagues. He had a hot start to the year, but he's really fallen off in terms of ownership. So he is only like 20% owned. So you should be able to pick him up, and he should have a good chance to have a second good game against Cincinnati. Very good matchup, a guy that you could probably start maybe even as a wide receiver too. Another guy that you'd want to consider picking up is Nelson Agholor. He's only 1% owned right now. Going against Cleveland, a good matchup in terms of against receivers, and he has kind of become the number 1 receiver in that offense. Derek Carr seems to like him. He's been a great addition to this offense. So Nelson Agholor is a guy that's going under the radar, but you should consider picking him up if you need wide receiver depth. And the last one, a lot of people are high on Rashard Higgins this week on the waiver wire, but the guy I'm going to add would be Donovan Peoples-Jones. You saw that catch he had at the end of the game on Sunday. The guy is an absolute freak. He was just as highly touted coming out of high school as Jerry Jeudy, who ended up going in the first round of the draft. He never really reached his full potential at Michigan, but that does not mean he won't in the NFL. I think he has a bright future ahead of him, and maybe the future's now. Going against a Raiders defense that isn't great by any means, Peoples-Jones could have an increased role with Odell Beckham Jr. out for the season. We'll finish today with another Cleveland Brown. The one tight end that I'm going to mention today is Harrison Bryant. He's also going against the Raiders this week, but with Odell Beckham out, Austin Hooper out, and David Njoku possibly being traded. We'll see what happens this week with the trade deadline approaching. But Harrison Bryant is going to also see an increased target share. Had 2 touchdowns on Sunday. Baker Mayfield seems to like him, and Bryant seems to be comfortable in Kevin Stefanski's offense. Stefanski really seems to like the style of play that Bryant brings, a guy that you would want to consider adding if you are thin at the tight end position. Well, that is going to do it all for today. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you all for tuning in and staying with the channel. Thank you so much for listening.